Hey there, students. I'm not able to be with you today, so I'm going to go ahead and record the lecture on the Second Persian Invasion and the Peloponnesian War and give you everything that you need to know, hopefully somewhere close to as if I were there. So last time we were together, we talked about the First Persian Invasion and the Battle of Marathon. And we watched an account of the Battle of Thermopylae. So we'll move on to the Second Persian Invasion, which occurred in 480 and 479 BC, and specifically the battles of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. So the Second Persian Invasion was led by King Xerxes I of Persia. Make sure you know that. And he led an army that the Greek historian Herodotus said numbered 250,000 men. Now, 250,000 men, an army of 250,000 men in the ancient world is a logistical impossibility, really, but we can just satisfy ourselves by saying a lot. All right. When the Greeks, and a lot of times in the ancient world, when they use numbers, they really are just saying a lot, 250,000 men. So it's just, more than we can count, really. And so 250,000, make sure you understand that that just means that's basically ancient Greek for a lot of men. And these, at the core of this Persian military, you had the immortals. And the immortals were the king's personal bodyguard, the Persian emperor's personal bodyguard. And these numbered 10,000 men. And it was said that every time one of these immortals died, that's why they called them the immortals, because somebody else would take their place. Someone else was ready to take that person's place at the king's side. So the Persian king always had this elite bodyguard of 10,000 men. And so the first battle that took place in the Second Persian Invasion was Thermopylae, which means hot gates. Now, Thermopylae was a hot spring, and it was in a mountain pass where you had the mountains on one side, the water on the other side, and so you had to pass through there to get to Athens. And so what happened here is that 300 Spartans and 7,000 allied Greeks faced off against the 250,000 so-called Persians. And what this battle was a delaying action, all right, that nobody anticipated a victory. No one expected a victory here, that the objective here was to give the Greek city-states time to regroup so that they could figure out how to meet this large Persian army. And this force at Thermopylae was led by King Leonidas of Sparta, who is depicted here in Jacques-Louis David's neoclassical painting from 1814. And so Leonidas of Sparta, the king, he consulted the oracle at Delphi. The reason that Leonidas decided to lead the army was that he went to the oracle, and the oracle made a prophecy that said Sparta will be sacked, or a Spartan king will die. Now, remember, when you're dealing with the Spartans, that you are supposed to hold the group above yourself. You are supposed to sacrifice yourself, that honor is more important than life. So in this kind of situation, Leonidas, as a Spartan king, really had no choice. Now, of course, the Spartans, predictably, were having a religious festival. So when Leonidas said that he was going to bring the Spartans to Thermopylae, the Spartan government said, no, you can't bring them. And so Leonidas then went by himself. And the reason why there were 300 Spartans is while the Persian king had a bodyguard of 10,000, Leonidas, as king of Sparta, had an honor guard of 300. So it was just Leonidas and his 300 elite bodyguards. And so day one of the battle, you see here where you see that there is a gulf here on one side. You've got rugged terrain on the other side. So the Persians are going to have to come through here to get to Athens. And so the Greeks have then put their phalanx formation here at the narrowest point in the pass, where the Persians, you can see, are facing a bottleneck. And so only a small portion of the Persian army is able to to engage itself. Now, the Persians were later told by a traitor that, well, you can actually get around. There's a mountain pass that a lot of people don't really know about. And so you can do this and you can get around. And so when it was discovered that the Persians were coming around, that's when Leonidas on the third day ordered all of the Greek allies to leave. And so only Leonidas and the Spartans stayed to fight to the death on the third day. And it was said that Leonidas told his men on the morning of the third day, "Tonight we dine in hell." And of course, here is kind of a proto meme of sorts. Leonidas of Sparta is often glorified in art and literature as a hero. I mean, he is the self-sacrificing patriotic leader. And when you think about so many of our political leaders seem to be in it for themselves, Leonidas is an example of this person who gave his life for his country willingly and decided that his country was more important than his honor was more important, and the Greek independence was more important than his own life. So as far as Thermopylae, know that you've got 300 Spartans plus those allies that don't get spoken of a whole lot. Leonidas versus King Xerxes, and the victor technically being the Persians, although as far as the objective, the Greeks never really thought that they were going to win at Thermopylae. So the Battle of Salamis was a naval battle, and this was a decisive Athenian victory. Now, this is something that will be a factor in the Peloponnesian War, is that the Athenians, they invested in their navy, whereas the Spartans were the biggest land army power. And so the Battle of Salamis, which I think about like a salamander, like a lizard, it's kind of wet. So, Salamis just sounds like a wet battle. Okay, so, that's how I remember that one was a naval battle. So just make sure that as far as that goes, now naval warfare in ancient Greece, there's a great thing on YouTube. If you look at Ben-Hur, that is oh, excuse me. All right, so you could look up the Ben-Hur naval battle scene on YouTube if the substitute wants to look that up. That's great, and you can see the strategy here was to ram ships. All right, a lot of people died in these battles. The objective there is to ram the ship, and then people would fight, and then one of the ship that got rammed would sink, and so very intense, very expensive, very deadly form of warfare here. And so just remember that was a naval battle, and the Athenians won that. And then finally, the Battle of Plataea, where you had a full Spartan mobilization. Now, this is very rare. I've mentioned before that although the Spartans always trained for battle, it wasn't often that you saw a full Spartan mobilization. I even read in one place, I believe, that they even armed some of the helots, which, you got to think they're got to be really desperate in order to arm their slaves. But several Greek city-states, but the Spartans, of course, taking the lead here, and all of these Greeks getting together and fighting the Persians in a large pitched battle and winning, largely because of their military technologies, which were superior for that time and place, and for the rugged terrain of ancient Greece. And so Plataea was a decisive victory with a full Spartan mobilization and by this Spartan-led coalition. All right, students, now that we've discussed the Persian Wars, let's go ahead and briefly discuss the Peloponnesian War. And as we go through this, I want you to remember an old Chinese proverb, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." All right, so keep that in mind. Now, remember that, first of all, the Greek city-states were not unified. There were, several, there were over a dozen, looks like, major city-states here. And so the Greeks themselves, often when they weren't fighting the Persians, they were fighting in some way or another versus each other. And of course, the Persian Wars were kind of the really the pinnacle of ancient Greek warfare in the sense, I mean, unless you're looking at Alexander the Great, of course, but this is where all of the Greek city-states got, together and they allied for a common purpose. So they united to defeat the Persians, but they continued after the Persian Wars were over. They're at the peak of their power, but Athens and Sparta continued to be at odds with each other and rivals. And so Athens started the Delian League. Now the Delian League is named for Delos, where the Delian League kept its treasury. Now you see here, this is more of a very naval kind of alliance here, and of course you could keep your treasury here because the Spartans aren't going to get it because the Spartans don't really have a navy. Now the Spartans formed in reference to that, the Peloponnesian League. Now, the Peloponnesian League being mostly city-states from the Peloponnesus, but also some other city-states here. So you've got the Spartans, the Corinthians, and then you've got Thebes and Plataea. Now, as far as the Delian League, which I've seen some people, this map refers to it as the Athenian League, and, which is more accurate because Athens was very dominant here. And so, the Delian League versus the Peloponnesian League. And so Athens was a sea power. All right, Athens, did their stuff in the water, and the Spartans, on the other hand, were a land power. All right, so as far as that goes, the strategy here was that the Athenians blockaded Sparta. They took the offensive at the sea, and they will continue foreign trade while they cut the Spartans off from foreign trade. Well, the Spartan strategy is to be offensive on land, which means that the Athenians had to assume the defensive posture. And then so Pericles was the most important Athenian general. Not going to go into detail about his contributions, but you should be able to, in a survey level course at least, associate Pericles with the Athenians in the Peloponnesian War. And so at this time, the Spartans had Athens under siege. All right, so they had clear land army superiority, and so what happened here is that the Athenians built a wall, as some people tend to do. And so you've got the north and the south long wall. Now this is about a 6 to 8 mile long wall, which connected the city-state of Athens with the port here at Piraeus. And so this allowed Athens, even while under siege, to continue to bring food into the city, to carry on foreign trade, because the Spartans really didn't have a navy to speak of. Now, unfortunately for the Athenians, plague ended up striking in the city, as happens when the Athenians, really the way the polis or the city-state worked is a lot of people would live on the outskirts. If you think about people that live in the suburbs or outside of the city limits, and think about if everybody had to come in and live inside the city limits, it would be very crowded and it would be difficult to keep everything clean and germ-free and all of that kind of stuff. So the Athenians had that problem. Now, as far as that goes, remember Athens was a sea power. Sparta was a land power. The strategy being Athenians having a defensive strategy and the Spartans having an offensive strategy, and the Athenians being part, the leaders of the Delian League, while the Spartans, had the Peloponnesian League. And so as far as what happened here, excuse the clip art, this slideshow, as you can tell, still needs some work. But what we have here is that Persia, they didn't like the Greeks that much, the Athenians or the Spartans, but again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Persians believed that the Athenians were more responsible for their defeat than anyone else. A lot of times we celebrate the 300 Spartans, and they deserve to be celebrated, but the Persians, when they, it's like, look, Sparta and Athens are fighting, the Persians decided that they wanted to get rid of Athens, and so the Spartans made a deal with the devil, so to speak, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. If Persia is going to cooperate with us to shut down Athens, then let's do it. And so now the Spartans have a navy, and the Athenian advantage is now neutralized. So Sparta wins the war, but then again, in this kind of situation, does anybody win? Because when you're fighting for that long, I mean, really, Athens surrenders, but the end result is that everyone is weaker. And this is significant because it's going to basically set up the conquest of Alexander the Great. That if Philip II, Alexander the Great's father, had gone into the Greek city-states and tried to conquer them at their prime, then he probably would not have been very successful. And, being there, after this, after these Greek city-states have torn each other apart, they were much more vulnerable to conquest by the Macedonians. And so the Greek historians, all right, so Herodotus, just a quick comparison of Herodotus and Thucydides, that Herodotus was the historian of the Persian Wars. He traveled, he interviewed people. He is regarded, as far as the Greek historians go, is regarded as more entertaining. And then there's Thucydides, all right? And so he's the historian of the Peloponnesian War, and this was really based on an eyewitness account that Thucydides was a veteran of the Peloponnesian War. Now, if you ask if this is more accurate, on one hand, you might think, okay, maybe so, but at the same time, he was an Athenian military leader, and even calling this the Peloponnesian War, if you think about it, wars are typically named after enemies. So the Peloponnesian War, this is the war against the Peloponnesian League. So this is a war with Sparta as the enemy. If Sparta had been doing this, been naming the war, then they would not have thought that that was something, we're not going to name it after ourselves or our alliance. The Spartans would have been more likely to call it the Athenian War, because that was for them the war against the Athenians. And so, it looks like I've done a little slide work here. Okay, like I said, this thing's still in the, in the stages, still hasn't been finalized. All right, but yeah, I've got a nice little slide for Herodotus. That's good to know. So Persian Wars, interviews, secondhand sources. But, the thing is, he was an eyewitness, but at the same time, when you look at Thucydides, it's an eyewitness account, but it's really a very skewed eyewitness account, being that he was an Athenian military leader. And so you already have, if you're looking for a neutral account of this war, you're probably not going to find it with Thucydides. So, he says that he's more accurate, but, is he really just making up for being boring in reference to Herodotus? Because if you're going to read one of these, Herodotus, it's generally regarded, tells a much better story than Thucydides. But Thucydides is more kind of he's trying to be more professional here. But these two historians are some of the first, people to really start this Western tradition of history. And so as far as that goes, y'all know that I've got a website, and with the time that's left in class, if y'all can watch the Battle of Gaugamela on Decisive Battles on YouTube, Decisive Battles Gaugamela, or Decisive Battles Alexander the Great, then that should take up most of your remaining class time, and I will see y'all on Monday to discuss, on Tuesday to discuss Alexander the Great, and we'll have your test on Thursday of next week. So be ready for that, and have a great weekend.